If you think about education, it seems to me that a lot of educators kind of begin with the premise that the world is just kind of this big clump of scarce resources. And the person's task in life is to fight and claw their way to try to acquire some of those scarce resources. And that fight begins in school, right? Students learn how to conquer the curriculum, conquer their classmates, move to the head of the class so that they can get well positioned for acceptance into the college of their choice. And as we've learned recently, if they don't get well positioned, mom and dad are going to make sure they are. Because that college degree, that's your ticket to the middle and upper class. You get that degree and you've got a distinct advantage in gaining some of the world's pie, a slice of the world's pie. And so we think education is much deeper than that. We think that humans are more important than that we're not trying to just prepare little cogs in the economic machine. We believe we're drawing upon, a couple of traditions. We're a classical school, goes back BC, before Christ, thousands of years. And for the classical tradition, the purpose of education was to get the student to live in step with the Logos. And the Logos was this force, this organizing structure of the universe. We're trying to get students to live in step with that. Hundreds of years later, St. Augustine comes along. He converts to Christianity. He was educated in that Greek model, and he has a choice to make in developing a Christian education. Would he discard the Greek approach to education and build a Christian education from the ground up? Or would he somehow fuse the two together, the classical tradition, and then develop a Christian understanding of education? He decided to do the latter, right, to bring them together. And he said this: the Greeks were right. There is a Logos. There is something that organizes all of creation. But it's not this impersonal force. It's a person. It's Jesus Christ. He holds all things together. And really, the thing that's organizing it is love. And that's the purpose of education, is to get students to tap in to the love that undergirds, thanks to Jesus Christ and his work on the cross, all of creation. So that as a result of an education, students can love God well and love their neighbor well. That's what we're trying to do as a classical Christian school, is help students tap in to the love that's underneath all that we see in Christ. There's a lot more to say about it, but at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Spears, our Lyceum director, to introduce our guest.
Thank you for coming. What better thing to do on a Friday night than to come hear Alan Noble talk about stuff? Alan got to talk to our high school students today. Good? Yeah. We got thumbs up and one clap. This is good. We are making things happen, Alan, here at the Academy. Those of you who are not in high school and you were not there, we are going to have that available to you at some point on the interwebs. It was really great. It was a non-freaking out, weird, whatever, thoughtful critique and understanding of what social media does to the hearts and minds of people who use it. And it is exactly what I think we need in terms of starting a conversation about those very issues. At the Academy, what we are trying to do, and our high school students love this, is to put their phones away every day for 8 hours. How many of you are putting your phones away for 8 hours a day? The high school students. And you can see how much they love it. They're thankful for it. They thank us every day for not letting them have their phones. Alan's book, Disruptive Witness, is an opportunity to read through his work on how technology and what it, in terms of distraction, is doing to us, and living in an age, what Alan calls, what Charles Taylor calls a secular age, and how all that sort of fits together. But what if there's a deeper issue at root? What if there's a fundamentally misunderstood theory of humanity at play here? Well, Alan's about to tell us more about that. Alan is a good friend of the school. Alan has a great family. His wife is here tonight. Brittany's fantastic. If you get to know her, you will appreciate why Alan is anything remotely normal. Alan's got a couple of kids, namely 3, and they are super cute kids. Hi, Andrew. Good to see you. Alan has written on things as varied as Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, a 900-page tome that nobody understands, not even Charles Taylor, to one of the best works of his, I think, that you will read is, kids, listen up, The Theology of Kendrick Lamar. For real. It's legit. It's good. You should check it out. So Alan has this wide-ranging understanding of what at his website, Christ and Pop Culture, is as a demonstration of what it means for Christians to live well in the culture and engage that culture well without either fully embracing or running and troglodyte, hiding in a hole somewhere and hoping it all goes away soon. Alan is a good friend of mine, I think. At least my direction. He shrugged. It's fine. It's what everybody does. It's fine, Alan. But what you will hear tonight, I think, is the beginning of the conversation. This is what Lyceum Project is about. What we want is to provide a place for what used to be happening all the time in a world in which we weren't distracted by our phones all the time, or television, or name it, your thing, where we had public disputations, we had public conversations about important issues of the day. We want Lyceum Project to be that thing for Oklahoma City. So what Alan will offer us tonight is something to chew on. This is the beginning of this conversation. Alan is not ending the conversation. So let's go forth after we get finished here to have further conversations about this fundamental need that we have to understand who we are and what it is we need to do about that. So without further ado, You Are Not Your Own, What It Means to Be Human, by Dr. Alan Noble.
Eventually, the conversation is going to have to end so I can go home. With that subtitle, What It Means to Be Human, I thought about just saying taxes and then leaving. But April's almost here, but I decided that probably Josh would no longer call me his friend, so we're not going to do that. We'll do something else. How is it possible to live in the most advanced, prosperous, and free nation in history and sense that our lives are, in some fundamental level, not right? How is it possible to carry around historically unimaginable tools of communication in our pockets and to live on a planet with 7.6 billion people and yet suffer from a crisis of loneliness? How is it possible to know more about the human mind, neurology, and psychology than at any other point in history, a body of knowledge developed over centuries through hundreds of thousands of intricate peer-reviewed scientific studies, and yet we have a growing mental health crisis? How is it that we can have perpetual, high-quality, affordable access to virtually limitless streams of entertainment content of every genre, style, and medium imaginable, and yet still feel terribly bored? How is it possible that each year we gain new systems, technologies, and services that allow us to be more efficient than ever, and yet work seems to invade more and more parts of our lives? I would suggest to you that we are not right. But wait a minute, Alan, you might be thinking to yourself, I actually know quite a few people who live happy, content, and interesting lives. The society you just described sounds nothing like their daily experience. And yet, I wonder, take their phones for 8 hours, computers, TV, podcasts, exercise classes, 80-hour work weeks, shopping sprees, and planners away from them for an hour. Would they not feel the weight of their own existence closing in on them? Would they not begin to worry, to feel a constricting anxiety, a fear of missing out, of falling behind, of wasting away? Would not their conscience begin to call up memories of failures, doubts, and insecurities? Thankfully, the modern world is perfectly designed for people who are afraid of being alone with themselves. Here's a theory. Apple didn't make the iPhone water resistant so that we can wash dishes and listen to NPR. They did it so that we don't have to be alone with our thoughts in the shower. Smartphones weren't designed to be addictive against our wills. We want to be addicted to our screens because a screen into another world is much safer than a mirror reflecting our own. A screen can divert our attention from the disorder right in front of us in our own hearts, even if it means diverting us with news reports of terrible, horrific things happening across the globe. So how many of those who seem to be living interesting lives are only able to get out of bed in the morning because of the momentum of life, because they know they have a job to get to or a school to attend or something else to do? How many of those who seem to live fulfilling lives are merely filling their lives? Now, I don't doubt for 1 minute that many Americans in America have stimulating, pleasurable, and comfortable lives, but so do many cats and dogs. And if humans are distinct from animals, we are, then stimulation and pleasure and physical comfort are wholly inadequate measures of the good life. But please don't understand me. I don't mean that everybody is absolutely miserable beneath the surface. But I do think a lot of us are anxious, lonely, tired, bored, overwhelmed, also tired again. The motto for many contemporary people is, I just need to get through this day. I just need to survive. And to cope with this, to survive, we self-medicate. We all self-medicate now. Some drink, some take prescription antidepressants or stimulants or anti-anxiety meds. Some eat, some binge-watch Friends. Some work harder, some exercise. Some cut themselves, some immerse themselves in the news, some watch porn, some pursue sexual exploits, some play video games, some shop, some sleep. Some become stans of K-pop groups. Ask someone to explain that to you if you... Some scroll endlessly through Instagram. Am I right or am I right? Right? Okay. Some argue with people online. Some obsess about their health. Some obsess about the environment. Some protest online. Some travel. Some attempt suicide. Some attempt self-improvement. Some abuse drugs. Some join extremist groups. Some join multi-level marketing programs. The lines get blurry at some point. Some take up yoga, some take up gambling, some participate in extreme sports, some seek illicit romance, some daydream about being diagnosed with a disease that will explain and justify their mediocrity. Some invest in self-care, some obsess about their mental illness, some discover a new identity, some modify their bodies, some embrace victimhood, some embrace mocking victimhood. But we all medicate, because if we don't, we can't get through the day. Now, if that sounds pessimistic about our modern quality of life, let's consider just two, and there are other things, many other things we could look at, but we only have time for two today. Growing trends in our country. Among young Americans, there has been a dramatic increase in mental illness diagnoses. College campuses have been ground zero for addressing these problems, but most schools struggle to keep up. Young people torn up over broken families, child abuse, anxiety, depression, loneliness, dread that they will never amount to anything, imposter syndrome, all sorts of things. Profound brokenness. One survey found that 43% of undergraduates, quote, felt so depressed that it was difficult to function in the past year. 43%. And 64% they said they felt overwhelming anxiety. Now, while the rise in mental illness diagnoses can be partially explained by heightened awareness and decreased taboos, I don't think that can explain it all. Something else changed. Young people are not all right, and frankly, the rest of us aren't doing much better. Between 2011 and 2014, 12.7% of persons aged 12 and over took antidepressant medication in the past month. The widespread use of psychiatric medication led one historian of psychiatry to remark, "We've come to a place, at least in the West, where it seems every other person is depressed and on medication." You do have to wonder what that says about our culture. More alarming is the increase in suicides and drug overdose rates, which have actually reversed the long trend in America of rising life expectancy. In November of 2018, the CDC director released a statement on the declining American life expectancy. He said, "Tragically, this troubling trend is largely driven by deaths from overdose and suicide, what is commonly called deaths of despair." Another expert said that the truly alarming thing is that addiction and the decline in the emotional well-being of Americans has been significant enough to drag down the entire country's average life expectancy, which hasn't happened since the First World War. But what if we're not primarily the ones who need to get better? What if we're not primarily the ones who need to be fixed, treated, or cured? What if the deeper problem behind much of our social or societal anxiety is that our society is not built for humans? Instead, the structures, values, practices, and myths that define our society assume a false conception of what it means to be human. And if that's true, at least some of our anxiety, our stress, our depression, our loneliness are not primarily personal problems to be adjusted, but natural and, frankly, fairly rational responses to living in a world that is unfit for us. That's part of my thesis. Now, what do I have in mind by this false conception of being human? Specifically, I mean the belief that we are our own and we belong to ourselves. This, I posit, is the modern anthropology, the basic way most people conceive of themselves and others. We are our own means that we are fundamentally autonomous individuals, and we define ourselves by discovering and expressing an identity. To belong to ourselves means our place in the world, our relationships and our obligations, our choices that we make. One implication of this anthropology is that if we are our own, then our purpose in life is to justify ourselves, to matter, to be known. We alone are responsible for making our lives fulfilling and meaningful. Hopefully that's not too shocking, because we hear language like this all the time. People will tell you to make your own destiny, right? This is what they mean. With that comes a great freedom to be whoever you want to be. We've sort of made that part of the American dream, haven't we? And haven't you been told this your entire life, that you should be who you want to be, that you should pursue your dreams, that you should be true to yourself, to live authentically, to let no one else define you or put you in a box? We read it on posters hanging in the walls of elementary and grade schools, not here, but other grade schools. It's true. Just trust me, guys. Don't worry. We are recruited to colleges with the promise of finding or discovering our true self. We surrender our privacy to social media in exchange for the opportunity to digitally craft, brand, and market our identity. We choose to belong to churches or to people only insofar as they fit our style. This freedom comes with an unbearable burden, the burden of justifying your life. You see, when everyone is frantically trying to create a meaningful and significant life, meaning and significance become kinds of scarce resources that we all compete over. Whenever I hear the stereotype that young people are lazy and apathetic, I think of my students and how completely backward that stereotype actually is. The students I know tend to be overwhelmed with the need to be good enough, to be successful, to do all the right things, to be approved. They are haunted by imposter syndrome, so much so that in a class of, say, 20 students, exactly 20 students think that they are the only ones who don't belong in the class or in college at all. They also suffer from choice paralysis, the fear that they might pick the wrong career or spouse or fraternity or Instagram filter. It's funny and true, so I'm working on two layers here, two levels. If your life is your own, then you have exactly one shot at mattering. And you are surrounded with examples of amazing, beautiful, talented, smart, wealthy people who do matter on Instagram, YouTube, TV, Twitter. The stakes are life and death, and the competition is far, far beyond your abilities. Even as pundits decry participation trophies, there's hardly anything in our society that I can think of which isn't in some way a kind of competition. For example, the top AR reading scores are posted in the hall of my first grader's school. First grade. My college seniors agonize over the terrible possibility of not having a 4.0. Good heavens. Social media provides in-depth data analysis of how many people like the things we post. Other students, that's one kind of student, but other students that I have, and I suspect actually a large segment of our society, instead of rising to the competition and becoming overwhelmed by it, they opt out. They opt out of the mainstream game of life after deciding that they don't have much of a chance of winning. Look, why compete if you know you're going to lose? The constant pressure to perform or achieve or improve in school or work or relationships or life in general is just exhausting. And if you figure that the cards are stacked against you, why try? For these students, online gaming, fringe online communities, niche hobbies, fan cultures, these things can provide pleasurable and interesting worlds, even if it is at the cost of achievements that traditionally have been more socially acceptable. But this is not about the young. There are completely equivalent dropout lifestyles for every age group and demographic you can think of. My point is that contemporary people are driven by an overwhelming sense of competition, the awareness that the world produces winners and losers, and the people who seem to be uninterested in this competition are sometimes the ones who are most deeply enthralled by it. Another implication of this anthropology is that if we are our own, then we have no obligation to recognize the meaning and significance in other people, places, ideas, or things. You may ask me to accept who you are, to respect your religious practices, to abide by your values, to acknowledge the dignity of life or the beauty inherent in the natural world, but unless you're willing to compel me through violence, all you can do is ask, because I am my own. And if the natural world appears beautiful to me, then I'll grant it beauty. But if the natural world appears like a resource to be claimed, commodified, extreme sportsed, and monetized, then I will use it. For if I am my own, then no external being or phenomenon can demand my respect. To belong to oneself is to be free from having to accept external meanings and values. Historically, this has led to the objectification and the instrumentalization of creation, including other humans. What I mean by instrumentalization is the process by which we treat things in the world merely as tools for our purposes. We use a spouse to fulfill our sexual and social status needs. We use employees to increase productivity. We use teachers to achieve student learning outcomes. We use nature to fulfill our dream for adventure. We use education to get a job, etc. There's a lovely example of this instrumentalization in C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters, where Screwtape admonishes his understudy demon Wormwood for letting his human patient enjoy reading a book and taking a walk. You might remember this. According to the demon, according to Screwtape, allowing a human to enjoy such things for their own sake is dangerous. It's the kind of thing that just might lead him closer to faith. Screwtape laments, "This is where you went horribly wrong. You should have put it into his mind that he had to get up in the morning and take a walk for the sake of exercise. It would have become drudgery to him. And you should have gotten him to read the book so that he could quote it to somebody else, or take a picture of it, post it on Instagram." That's the modern adaptation, right? It would have become equally uninspiring. You allowed him to enjoy such pure pleasure that the enemy's voice became more audible within those experiences. That is where you went wrong. Using this example, let me add another term, technique, which I'll define in a minute here. You see, the instrumentalization of the world, particularly after the Enlightenment and with the rise of secularism, both of which stripped away our basic assumption that the world is shot through with God's grandeur, this instrumentalization of the world was accompanied by the metric rise of mechanization and later what we call technology, starting around the 19th century. Once you accept that the world is not filled with intrinsic meaning and can be used as tools for your own purposes, then all you need is data, analysis, and method to become motivated almost entirely by the relentless pursuit of efficiency. And this is technique. And under the influence of technique, we don't want to just take a walk for the prodigal pleasure of walking. We want to walk to exercise. We want to walk and listen to a podcast. We want to walk with a Fitbit to collect data to prove that we've done something meaningful. All of these turn a simple act of enjoying a walk in God's creation into a method for efficient living. The mid-century French Protestant sociologist, that's a lot of words, mid-century French Protestant sociologist Jacques Ellul's landmark work, The Technological Society, in this, he argues that the defining feature of our age is the domination of technique into every single aspect of our lives. For Ellul, technique is different from technology, which mostly refers to machines. Technique describes the function of machines, but it also describes the way virtually all of us order our affairs. He defines it, quote, as the totality of methods rationally arrived at and having absolute efficiency in every field of human activity. Maybe a simpler definition could be a system of rational methods for making any human activity more efficient. Hopefully this description has sparked some examples in your mind, but I'll give you a few to put some meat on the bones. One example of technique would be a weight loss app which tracks your fitness and uses advanced metrics to create an optimized weight loss plan and workout plan for you. All forms of life hacking are examples of technique. Websites that teach you how to profit off of credit card reward programs are technique. Parenting books which outline precise strategies, for example, limits on screen time, hours, numbers of hours you need to read to your children every day, enrichment activities, all strategies determined by careful research to raise the healthiest and most successful child possible. Those are examples of technique. Automotive computer systems that warn you we need to change the oil, technique. Standardized testing, one of the most loathed versions for teachers and students. Leadership programs, self-help books, government bureaucracy, call waiting systems at massive corporations. If you've ever been on hold, right? Why can't you just talk to a human? Because for the sake of efficiency, they've decided that they're not going to hire enough people to answer the phones. I mean, they always tell you that they have an unusual number of calls. It's not true. It's a lie. It's a lie. Why are they lying? Because it saves them money. Efficiency. efficiency. Rational methods of arriving at efficiency. A few of these examples probably felt fairly benign. For example, I don't mind having a toothbrush that turns off automatically after the dentist-approved brushing time has been achieved. Although I do worry that new research might reveal soon that the optimal brushing time is 3 minutes and not 2, and then I'll either need a new toothbrush or I'll need some kind of software upgrade, which doesn't seem very likely. But some of these other examples might have caused a small spike of anxiety in you. For example, standardized testing, bureaucracy, endless and contradictory parenting books. A society governed by technique is a perpetually exhausting society because human life is ultimately irreducible to rational methods of efficiency because we're not machines. Technique often contributes to the experience of an inhuman society with which I began this talk. For example, the healthcare industry, private or government run, take your pick, seems incapable of treating sick people as unique human beings made in the image of God. We are data points, we are statistics, subjects to apply best practices to, we're trends, we're classifications, we're not people. Systems whose highest goal is efficiency inevitably dehumanize us. But there's another way that technique, made possible again by the belief that we are our own, leads directly to the inhuman conditions of modern life. That frantic desire to express an identity in a competitive and hostile world, which we discussed just a few minutes ago, that desire often manifests in addictions to methods. Let me give you a few real-world examples, hypothetical, but real-world. Let's say that I have a midlife crisis. I wake up one morning and struggle to get out of bed. In fact, I struggle to move at all. It feels as if a boulder is sitting on my chest, anxiety constricting me. And the question that continues to haunt me is, why am I doing all this? Today will be the same tired routine as yesterday and every day prior. The most I have to look forward to is the latest superhero movie, but even that feels flat and dull. And so I force my way out of bed and begin to think about how to get out of this funk, how to improve my life. I ask a friend who seems to have his life together what I should do, and he recommends a fitness regimen that focuses on increasing oxygen to the brain so as to lower levels of stress and release dopamine. I tell my boss that my work no longer excites or interests me, and he recommends taking a series of company-sponsored leadership courses which will train me for upper management. I tell my doctor of my depression, and he asks me to alter my diet, cutting out caffeine and chocolate, the very things I use to get through my day. I tell my psychiatrist, and she prescribes anti-anxiety medications. I tell my pastor, and he gives me a workbook on discovering and overcoming your spiritual weaknesses in 3 weeks. That's not in there, I just added that. My aunt recommends essential oils, specific essential oils used at specific times of the day on specific parts of my body in specific amounts. My cousin suggests that I discover my Enneagram number so that I can chart a path towards a healthier life. This list could go on forever, really. And with each new item, the burden of trying to keep up with all of these possible ways of fixing yourself grows and grows. And the methods of better living through efficiency that promise to relieve my depression and anxiety and aimlessness actually compound them. Each new day, a new method is introduced to me through social media, the news, ads, friends, etc. In sum, the belief that we are our own creates an insatiable drive to create meaning, order, and significance in our lives, leading to a society in which everyone is frantically competing for recognition and affirmation. Because we belong to ourselves, we no longer need to accept meaning and value from any external source except by force, and so we instrumentalize the world and then fall under the sway of technique. We use technique, then, to help us in the frantic competition to assert our identity. All of this is dehumanizing, but it is dehumanizing precisely because it assumes a false idea of who we are, who the human person is. It is a society not made for us. And this is the fundamental lie of modernity, that we are our own. Until we see this lie for what it is and root it out from our culture and replant a conception of human persons as not being our own, but belonging to God, all our efforts at improving our world will be glorified Band-Aids. Sometimes glorified Band-Aids are the best we can do, but we can't stop there. Let's talk about potential way out of this problem. The first question and answer in the Heidelberg Catechism reads, "What is your only comfort in life and death?" The answer is that I am not my own, but belong with body and soul, both in life and death, to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. A proper understanding of our personhood requires that we recognize that we are not our own. At our core, we belong to Christ, which does not just mean that we give mental allegiance to Christ or that our identity is hidden in Christ, whatever that means. The truth is deeper and more complex than any of these phrases convey. In him we live and move and have our being. In him we are justified not by works but by faith. This justification is objective. It's both external and internal. God's affirmation of us and our being in the world because of his Son's work on the cross is real regardless of how we feel about ourselves and regardless of whether or not other people acknowledge our worth. Our union with Christ necessarily entails belonging to his body, the church, and to our families and our neighbors. The external truth of our worth transforms us and obligates us to move outward in Christ-likeness for the sake of others. Only if we are not our own can we affirm that we actually are our brother's keeper. So an anthropology formed by Christianity is diametrically opposed to the contemporary belief that we are autonomous individuals who find our greatest fulfillment in breaking free from all external norms. Instead of the burden of self-creation, we can rest in our justification in Christ. We don't need to discover an identity. We don't need to brand ourselves. We don't need affirmation from romantic relationships or Twitter followers or parents or possessions or achievements. We don't need to compete. We don't need to endlessly improve the efficiency of our lives, endlessly strive toward better and better ways of living without any regard for beauty or truth or goodness. And for those of us who respond to the dehumanizing nature of our society by dropping out of the competition altogether, there's great hope for you. If the pressure to achieve and perfect yourself and be successful has driven you to despair or boredom or deadened your emotion, or to deadening your emotions with entertainment or food or substances, you were right. The game is rigged. The rat race really is a rat race. The existential pressure to be somebody really is just a form of societal sickness. But there are other ways. Our comfort, and it is a comfort in life and death, is that we are not our own, and that all the maladies I describe are disorders, and they aren't the right nature of things. They don't reflect who human persons truly are. Our task, we only need to be faithful, and not faithful in order to achieve this comfort, but because of it. Once we recognize our true anthropology, we begin to have a way to push back against a society that denies that anthropology at every single turn. This is not a problem that we can choose our way out of individually, however. Only by internalizing our belonging to God, our dependence upon him, and all the beautiful and holy obligations and limits and duties to him and our neighbors that naturally and rightly flow from belonging, only then can we move to change our churches, to create art, to support policies, to vote for politicians, to start businesses that reflect our personhood, and that therefore give dignity and grace to our neighbors. But this can't merely be done on an individual level. We must collectively create institutions, spaces, communities, and movements which swim up the cultural stream. Now hear me, I'm not saying that once you internalize this truth that you'll somehow magically no longer be depressed or anxious. That's not the case. So long as the rest of society is structured under the assumption that we are autonomous individuals We will always be fighting a battle against alienation, dehumanization, and stress. But when you can name the source of a disorder in the world, when you can explain why it is that you feel this frantic need to compete and be good enough, then you can begin to deny it its power over you. And that is our comfort in life and death. Thank you. Oh, you want me to leave?
Yeah, scoot over for a sec. Thank you, Alan. That's pretty good. Okay, so we're going to have some question and answers. Your questions, Alan's answers. And by questions, I mean questions. I don't mean monologues. I mean questions. They have question marks at the end of them. Your voice slightly rises at the end, so that Alan can say something in the declarative voice with a period at the end. Or an exclamation. You may get something like that. I almost stopped you. That little Enneagram. Yeah. We'll talk later. All right, so two of our fine high school gentlemen have microphones. If you have a question, raise your hand. They will bring you a mic. You'll say your question into the mic. Alan will answer it, and then we'll go to the other side, and then we'll go back to this side, and then we'll go to the other side. Good? Yeah? Good? Got it? Rear? Mm-hmm. Good. All right. Now? Who's up?
Look at that. I'm kind of scared.
Hello. I actually have 2 questions for you.
Why don't you talk about the number of questions? All that 10-minute speech and you didn't tell them because it's your son. Nepotism.
Okay,
Go ahead.
the first
I'll take it.
question is, when you figured out you were going to speak in front of an audience, how did you, know how to write your paper in order to, try not to offend anybody? And yeah, things like that. Yeah.
Is this about your dad being offended about the bananagrams or the enneagrams? Anne has my back. Where's Anne? Don't tell me she left. There she is. Yeah, Anne's got my back about this, right? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anne. I didn't actually worry too much. Did you feel offended? No? You're good?
No.
Okay, cool. We're good. You're not going to see me outside afterward? Okay. I didn't worry too much about offending people. I just try to, tell the truth and not be unnecessarily, rude or something. And if something is challenging or upsetting, then people can talk to me and whatever.
Okay. And my second question is, did you find it kind of ironic that you did not use a paper, but you used an iPad for your
That's good. Thank you.
try to go away from
Thank you.
technology speech?
Now, I have a question here. Did he put you up to this?
Absolutely not.
I thought he was going to say absolutely. You're a sharp kid. Next question. I'm reading a paper. No. So I am not a Luddite, so I don't believe that technology is bad. I think we just have to be thoughtful about it. Was that okay? Thank you. I'm offended, frankly. When you decided to ask a question, did you think about offending someone? Last time I come out here. All right.
I tend to blame most of society's problems on baby boomers or people who read too much Ayn Rand. How much of that do you lay at their feet?
Can you repeat that? I'm blaming baby boomers and Ayn Rand. What was the question?
I point most of society's problems to those two groups of people.
Oh, so that was a statement. Did you have a did it,
No, I was
wasn't a
just saying,
question.
how much do you agree with me?
Oh,
That's
there we go.
basically what my question is.
You didn't ask. That's another loophole. You're 2 for 2. I don't know. Society, the way society shifts is incredibly complicated. So, it started long before the baby boomers. So, you just keep pushing it back. So, I mean.
Like objectivism and what you're saying about the self are very similar.
Yeah, certainly. I'm skeptical about Ayn Rand's influence. I mean, aside from tricking high school students into writing exams for her scholarship or whatever, I'm just not convinced that there's a whole lot of it. I would say that the rise of mass media, technology, and consumerism, I would say that both of those have a lot more of an influence on us, and in a much more organic way than objectivism proper. Yeah, no, he put his hand down. You're not fast enough. Who did you pick to do this?
All right, so I get it. I'm drowning in information, and I wish I didn't know there were 300 possible career paths in the future. But now the problem is that if I choose any one career path, if I settle down, I'm worried that I made an arbitrary choice or something like that. So how do you...
Yeah.
It seems like there's no going back once you know there are a whole bunch of options.
Yeah.
So is that true? Is there any going back?
It's fascinating. So Emil Durkheim has this idea called the malady of the infinite, which I think is really helpful. So the idea is that the more options that you have available, the more discontent you will be. And the more anxious that you will be about your choice. If you have fewer options, then we're not actually as troubled. I teach, this semester I'm teaching contemporary literature, and I teach The Bell Jar, which is a funny, fantastic novel, also very depressing, but it's also very funny. In it, there's a powerful scene. I think the pivotal scene, the protagonist imagines herself at the bottom of a fig tree. And each fig in the tree represents a career option. So one of them is a famous editor, one of them is a famous poet, one of them is a mother, one of them is a professor, one of them is a art curator. And she looks up at them and she feels unable to move, which is choice paralysis. There are too many great things to choose from. And her nightmare / daydream is that she stays down there at the bottom of the tree waiting to pick one until they all wither and drop to the ground. And it's fascinating teaching this text to juniors and especially seniors in college, because they almost always resonate with this book and that passage deeply. And they think, that is me. I have no idea what I'm going to do, and it terrifies me. And so the advice that I've been trying to give to my students, because I don't want to just give them Sylvia Plath advice, as wonderful as she is, and she was wonderful in many ways, but tragic. If our lifestyle choices, our career choices, have existential weight, they define who we are, and who we are defines our worth, then you're screwed. The good news is they don't. And so, your job, and I just hinted at this briefly, is to be faithful. So you make a wise decision. And you love others around you. And you don't worry about the other options that you passed by, because they don't really matter. Because this life is not about having the optimal life in a worldly perspective. It's about loving God. And that can look, you can have 10 wonderful options available to you. You just pick one and go for it. And don't worry about it. And just love people and delight in the skills and abilities and opportunities God has given you. And if something changes, then you just go with that, and that's okay too. And I think once we realize that existential weight, this is not deciding whether I am a successful human being. Once you throw that nonsense, that lie off, then you can just make a good choice and roll with it. Good question. We're supposed to go to the other side, but I don't. That's true. But look at them. They're not even asking any questions. Oh! I'm coming back to you. I got you.
Sometimes in our society it seems like it's, trendy or cool to be kind of like sad and depressed, I guess. So
yeah.
How do we get out of that?
That's a wonderful question. All right. Ralph Waldo Emerson, in one of his essays, he wrote this after the loss of his son and dealing with mourning the loss of his son. And he says something to the effect of, there are moods in which we court suffering in the hopes that when we find it, the jagged edges of reality will come to us. And I think what he's trying to get at there is that for many people, particularly in a very virtual world, in a world where reality seems in question, what is real and what is fake, we deeply desire to feel real. We want to feel something. And sometimes the most accessible thing to feel is terrible. And there's a seduction to that. There's a draw to that. This is why, I'm sure we've all known, and if you don't know, you will know, people who consistently make terrible life decisions. They go with people and you think, why would you do this? It's going to end badly. You must foresee this. Why do you do this? And there are many explanations, but I think one, for at least some people, is that they are attracted to the suffering because at least in suffering they feel alive. Now, how do we get out of that? Well, I think once you can recognize that, that the attraction to sadness, to mourning, to sorrow, to suffering is really just a way to feel alive, then you can look toward the source of life and recognize that what you're doing is just a disordered version of what you were called to do, which is to embrace the life that you've been given. And that sense of being alive and mattering and being real, you already matter. You are already worthy and important, and God has already affirmed you. You don't need to feel terrible in order to get that rush, that sense of having something significant happening to you. It's easy to say that, and it's one thing to internalize it, right? But I think overall, that's what needs to happen. You ready?
Thanks. So my friend and I, we talk a lot about this a lot lately in thinking about our young children, and she has teenagers. And so she says what's missing from the conversation is the idea of vocations. And for many people, you hear vocation and you think, oh, religious life. But it's more than that. And so I was just wondering, when you mentioned that our society, or you said, what if our society is not built for humans? And so then that's kind of where I started thinking of this conversation with my friend. And so for us, we were saying, well, vocations isn't just about the religious life, but marriage or the single life. And so I was just wondering what you would say to bring that into the conversation, this idea of talking to our children about vocations.
I think that can be helpful. Now, I'll tell you where I've seen it with some students. Sometimes what students will do is they will spiritualize the very anxieties that you were describing, right? So they're a senior, they're in college, they're thinking, who am I going to marry, right? This person I'm dating, is this really the right one? Is this the person I am called for, right? And so soon we spiritualize this language of choice, and then all we've done is we've sort of baptized this anxiety that we have of making the perfect choice. So it doesn't have to be that way. But I will say that I have seen it with many, many students. They will come to me with just all this stress about, I don't know if this is what God's calling me to do. And so I'll ask them, is this a wise thing to do? Well, then you should probably do that because God gave you wisdom. So go do that. But they want to know that this is the thing to do. So perhaps vocation language can still be used if it's stressing faithfulness, right? So in the sense of marriage as this sacred covenant, and not something that is once you enter into it, it's not optional. It's not something you get to opt out of. It's a covenant. There, I think it can be helpful. But at least in certain circles, I do worry about the way that can be sort of spiritually abusive, unintentionally, but nevertheless. Yeah, good question. 3 high schoolers. Choose wisely. You just chose the closest one.
At the beginning of your speech, I was kind of worried that you were going to tell me to burn my phone. So thank you for not doing that. But if you don't want me to do that, what action do I need to take? What do you want me to start doing when I leave this room tonight?
Read your Bible, pray. Burning a phone is a terrible idea. The toxins that would be released would be more deadly short term, but death is permanent, so I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I would have to know what your life is like, right? I'm honestly not sure. Are you concerned specifically about your use of technology and what kinds of boundaries that you should set? Is that kind of what you're...
No, I was more what action are you urging the student as a whole?
Okay. Yeah. So I think the first thing that we need to do is language, labels, terminology. One of the things it can do is it can empower you to categorize things that you experience but you don't understand. They teach us a lot in behavioral psychology. If you have problems with irrational thoughts, a good psychologist will teach you to label that as irrational, because if you keep thinking it's rational, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But once you learn that power of labeling, that power of describing something, of identifying it, saying, oh, I know what that is, then you can begin to resist. So in this talk, I'm primarily focusing on this, what I call this basic lie of modernity, which is that we are our own. So one basic step would be contemplating that concept and trying to identify it out in the world. Where do you see people telling you or assuming something about you that you are basically your own and that you belong to yourself? Okay? So that would be a basic step. The next step is, and it has to follow, is that you replace that with the better. You replace that with the truth. You begin to internalize the fact that your only comfort in life and death is that you are not your own, but you belong to God. And that really is a comfort. It's not a terrifying thing. It's not a loss of freedom. It's actually freedom. And from that, I think it can have lots of different implications. I mean, I mentioned here, I think, when it comes to choosing, maybe I did and I can't remember, I might have cut this, but, thinking about career options, right? If your life is your own, then your primary focus should be on choosing a career or a future or a spouse that is interesting and fascinating to you, period. If our lives are not our own, then we need to ask, what does our community need? What does my church need? What does my family need? And maybe you have to set aside some of the desires you have. Maybe you'd really love to be a painter full-time, but your community needs a vet. And so maybe you need to be a vet and you need to paint on the weekends, right? And there are many people in society today who would say, do not sacrifice what you want. Do not sacrifice your dreams for this community. You will regret it for the rest of your life. And I think I've told you where that lie comes from. Right? So that's the sort of baby step, but there's a whole horizon of possibilities that I have to finish writing a book to get into. Yeah.
We're going to stay here with the high school.
Ageism.
So in talking about this idea of competition that's encouraged in our society, you seem to categorize two different kinds of people: those who don't want any part of the competition because they're sad that they can't meet the standards society has set for them, and then there's the people who try so hard to find their worth in those things that society says important. So I'm wondering, out of those two groups of people, which do you think is closer to this idea of realizing that humans are not their own, and how should these different groups approach that idea differently?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're both equally disordered, right? And both of them, in my experience, both of them end in crashes. The student who is confident that, or the successful professional who is confident in their ability to constantly win, finds at some point in their life they can't. And sometimes that is a horrifying experience. It's very common for me to have, for example, AP students who aced things and who went to good high schools and did excellent English, and they come in, and in freshman composition, they can't get a B. And they're in my office in tears because life is harder than they thought. And that was a successful one. And sometimes those students become those other kinds of students. Sometimes they say, well, screw this. This isn't worth it. I thought I understood this. I evidently don't. It's not worth it. So I think they're both equally disordered. So the key is, in my opinion, that we're called to do everything with excellence unto the Lord. Right? In that idea, who are we competing against? Not a trick question. Nobody. There's nobody. If you're doing everything with excellence, everything you put your hand to excellence, with excellence to the Lord, who are you competing against? Now, in a marketplace, you are necessarily going to be, if somebody comes to your store versus somebody else's store, there is a level of competition. But what I'm asking you is, in your mind, what is your focus? What is your passion? What are you motivated by? What keeps you up at night? What excites you? What are you passionate about? What kind of language do you use when you're talking about the projects or activities that you're involved in? Is it focused on competition, on winning, or is it focused on excellence unto the Lord? And the beauty of that is, when you do everything with excellence unto the Lord, when you get that C in freshman composition, it's okay. It's just a C in your first class, one semester in college. And you brush it off, and you keep going. And for the student, for the person who feels like the game is rigged, I don't have the resources to compete in this ultra-competitive winners and losers society, again, I would want to affirm that their intuition that this society is broken is right. Where they're wrong is opting out entirely, because they have an obligation to their neighbors to participate. And that pulling in and dulling their senses with stimulation is not loving their neighbor, it's not loving God, it's not even loving themselves. And so what they have to learn is that the stakes aren't actually that high. That it's okay to fail. It's okay for them to get D's and F's and C's. They'll be okay. But they need to get in and try. They need to work with excellence unto the Lord. Do we still want to go over here? Yeah. There was one more. Yeah. You do not need another question, young man. Do we have security here? I think you are security.
Big brother.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
With thinking back on the lecture that you gave us this morning over how technology interferes and stuff, how much of that also interferes with the juniors and seniors in college who also come into your class in tears, either scared that they have a 3.5 GPA or are thinking about just completely ditching out of college?
Yeah, good. So one way that social media contributes to this problem, of a highly competitive society, is that it tends to give you a false impression of how well everybody else is doing. And I think I mentioned this morning, that we all know that when people go on spring break and they post all their awesome pictures, we know that they only chose the best pictures, right? We know that they've all been digitally altered, and yet the effect is still the same. And I think it's because it's a cumulative effect, right? It's not just if you just had one friend who did this, who only posted positive things, positive pictures, bragging about how well she did on a paper, so on. I got accepted into this graduate program, whatever. You could shrug it off and say, I'm not seeing the other side of this person's life, and that's okay. But I know that she's only trying to present a certain image. Where it gets challenging for all of us, and where I see students struggle, is that it's not just one friend, it's the vast majority of people. And that has this weight. So even though my students are intelligent enough to know, wow, I know this person's actually struggling with this in their life, but they're not posting about it, it still, over time, creates this image that, this morning, we talked a bit about how social media it's almost like a form of personal PR, right? Like, we all have our personal PR, we're in charge of it, and we're great at creating our own brand. Well, when you do PR, you only talk about the best things. And if you're spending a lot of time looking at other people's personal PR, that's going to make you feel inadequate. It doesn't need to. But it can. And I think what can happen is, if you already have some maybe imposter syndrome, you feel like you're the only one who doesn't belong in this class or in this college, or you have some insecurities, or you're feeling vulnerable at that moment, and you see a whole stream of people bragging about things, humble bragging or just straight bragging, it can affect you. Right? I mean, that's when you're vulnerable to seeing, wow, everybody's life is really great except for mine. I probably should be doing better, right? Yeah. I had, in graduate school, I had a friend who posted on Facebook that he got a paper accepted somewhere. No. It was, anyway, it doesn't matter the details. Some success story in grad school, and I immediately got angry. And I started making excuses to myself. Well, I have 2 kids, so that's why I don't have this paper published. And then I quickly realized, what am I doing? Why is it that my heart is so bothered? Why can't I rejoice with those who rejoice? Why can't I just be like, hey, that's awesome, good for you? It's because I was terrified that I was a fake, that I was not good enough to be in a PhD program, and that I was not achieving enough, and I would never get a job, and that it would turn out to be a failure. So in that situation, social media, somebody just sharing something good, she did not mean in any way to present only a positive version of her life, but it had that effect. In that case, it was helpful for me because it revealed certain things about my heart, though. Better be good, Amy. It can be okay, Amy. It doesn't have to be important.
It can just be an okay question.
That's right.
Okay. So in thinking about what you said at the beginning, you are not your own, and we have all these ways of self-medicating and utilizing technique. But then the answer is that we belong to something greater. Some of the things that you're referring to as self-medicating or technique, like, to me, like, well, I enjoy that thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where is that line of,
Yeah.
like, in my mind, it's not self-medicating. It's
Right.
like, well, I really like travel hacking with credit cards. and so
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
I guess what I'm asking is, what's
Yeah.
the line? Like, when does it
Yeah.
stop being just the walk that I'm enjoying and the book that I like,
Yeah.
and sort of become this alternative self-medicating problem that
Yeah.
I need to be concerned about?
That's good. I think Lewis gives us, I'm glad you brought that back up, because I think Lewis gives us some guidelines in the screw tape letters, right? So are you reading a book to read it, or are you reading it to find quotes to post on Instagram? People reading Bible in the morning, right? Like, how many people you get the classic picture of the cup of coffee and the journal and the Bible open on Instagram? I hope I'm not. Do you think I'm offending them? I need you to escort me out on the way, so don't go anywhere. But you know what I'm saying? So I think Lewis is pointing to something there, this idea that you can't just enjoy a walk. Now, can you enjoy, is it okay to go for a walk for exercise sometimes as well? Yeah, I mean, it's not, you can do both. What's worrying is when all other possibilities are pushed out by this need to be efficient, this need to numb ourselves from the anxiety, the stress, the dread that we have that we kind of just push aside. That's where it's problematic. Exercising is not a bad thing. That was on my self-medication list. Binge watching Friends actually is a bad thing. Don't. But many of those things are, anti-anxiety medications are not inherently bad. Okay? What I'm suggesting is that when there are patterns, when the totality of our life is caught up on this, when we can't, again, go for a walk and just enjoy it, okay? When we feel like, I don't know, I feel this often where there's just so much pressure to keep up with all the things going on. I've got this stack of medical bills sitting next to my chair that just keeps growing, and I can't remember which ones have been paid and which ones I need to wait on for like a follow-up bill and which ones the insurance is going to fix. It's all these sort of daily things that just, you feel like you're drowning in them. To me, that's a line. So don't feel bad about your travel credit cards, unless you are charging a bunch of stuff that you shouldn't be buying. So, all right, you're good. Good, I approve. Not that my opinion matters, but I approve anyway.
So through all of this, I was just wondering, are you familiar with the Alan Jackson song, It's All Right to Be Little Bitty? And to what extent? You're not at all. Okay.
I haven't, no.
I would commend that. No, you don't want that. I would commend that song to you.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Music tip. That was a lovely way to end this.
Alan, no.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Alan. I have some other thank yous to give you, Jamie, and the ops folks. Thank you. Teachers, it was crazy today, so rhetoric teachers, thank you for a crazy day today. First Baptist Church and Sarah Stewart, the pastor here. Lyceum students, the 5-day people who show up 5 days. And this is the kind of thing we want Lyceum to be, where we're having these kinds of conversations with your 5-day dialectic and rhetoric students. You coming tonight, Eric, he's hiding up there. He doesn't want to be noticed, but he makes the sound possible and the light possible. Carl, Eleanor, Jamie, and now Alan are fourth. Those are our 4 Lyceum Project speakers. I'm sure they'll watch this. Hey, guys. We've been growing this thing, and so we're grateful for them to do that. I have one challenge for y'all over there. Dr. Noble has 2 hip-hop albums somewhere floating around the internet, house points to whoever brings those to me. Did you already find them? Yeah, you got to bring me proof. Yes. Yeah, you got to bring me one of the songs, rap it for me or something. I need some sort of actual copy. They're all, look at them, they're all on their phones over there right now. They're all doing it at this very second. House Point's the first one to bring me those albums. It's the only thing we do here. Lyceum Project, I intentionally want this to be around Easter. I intentionally want us to have these speakers talk to us about these things because we are convinced at the Academy, if you're not, that's okay, but we invite you to join us in this, that the promise of the resurrected world that Christ brings with him from the grave is the answer to the issues we're dealing with in these lecture series from the Lyceum Project. So join us next year in April, around the 1st of April, for our 5th annual Lyceum Project 2020. You'll have to wait to see who will be here until closer to then. Until then, thank you again. Stick around. Alan will talk to all of you individually for as long as you want. Otherwise, Bennett will escort you out the door. Thank you again. We'll see you soon.